Hi everyone. So today, or this week's chapters, we're going to read more than just 3 or 4 because some of the chapters are really small, but you still are going to do 2 reading logs this week. And I'm going to make it as easy as possible. For every 2 days of watching these reads, you only have to write 6 sentences about what we read. Don't worry about anything specific, just write about what we read. The more specific ones will be later. So last week I read chapter 19, but I forgot to read that email. So we're going to start with that. The subject is urgent bios. It's still on the same day, May 25th. This is at about an hour and a half after the original email. It's at 4:12 in the evening. It's from Nigel Rasmussen again to the department head distribution list. These readouts are alarming. GB doesn't have much time left. GB is Janine Belisario or Janine Belisario. Premature disconnection may be the only option, and the technologists warn this could result in severe brain damage, likely to leave GB in an irreversible vegetative state. The translation software garbled Japan's last message. Japan, please have something for us. Reword and resend ASAP. So, this chapter and chapter 21, I want you to write just 6 sentences about it. Chapter 20, titled Siege. Kendrick, Abbas, and Zenas were the fastest. I was right behind them as we ran down the hallway. From outside, I could hear yelling, but when I reached the doorway to the courtyard, I could see the drawbridge was up, which wasn't a pleasant surprise. A flaming arrow hit the doorframe inches above Zenas' head. He yelped and went into reverse, treading on my toes. "Never mind," he muttered, slinking past me, past Adriana and Deming, who were on my heels, back into the safety of the hallway. Oriel had stopped far enough back to be out of danger of stray arrows, and Sister Mary Ursula had just rounded the corner, huffing as she waddled in our direction. We had forgotten poor Aldemore back at the table. Just as I was about to peek out the doorway, Kendrick and Abbas came racing back from outside. I stepped out of their way barely in time to avoid a collision. Abbas paused only long enough to grab the burning arrow out of the wooden doorframe and fling it to the ground, where it burned out harmlessly. Kendrick threw open the side door, and both brothers dashed up a steep spiral staircase. I took a moment to see what was going on in the courtyard. Some of our guards were there, lugging buckets of water to put out fires that had caught in the thatched roofs of the surrounding outbuildings, like the barracks and the well housing. But most of the guards were up on the walls. Assuming that that was where the stairs led, I followed after Abbas and Kendrick. The noise of the men shouting became louder. I came out onto the wall that surrounded both castle and courtyard. I had known I'd been over it when the barbarians had carried me, but at that time, I hadn't been in any condition to notice much. Now I saw that the walls were wide enough to accommodate men running back and forth, trying to defend the castle. There was no safety rail on the castle's side, which made my 21st century self cringe at the possibilities of injuries and subsequent lawsuits. But the side that faced out had that typical solid then open pattern, like a jack-o'-lantern smile, with every other tooth missing, that my medieval self recognized as the battlements. The guards could hide behind the upright sections, the merlins, then shoot arrows through the openings called crenulations. The trouble was that the enemy arrows could also fly through those openings. Dead and wounded men lay where they dropped, stepping over by guards intent on keeping the barbarians from scaling the walls. When I had been in the barbarian camp, I had the impression that there was a lot of them. They looked like even more now that they were running towards the castle, waving their swords, firing their arrows, and battering at the upright drawbridge with the tree trunk long enough to reach over the ditch. They had catapults too. I was just in time to see the first bombardment. Huge rocks wrapped with rags that had been soaked in something flammable. 2 of the rocks landed in the courtyard, where they didn't inflict much damage, but the third landed on the battlement itself, crushing 1 man and burning those who tried to go to his rescue. Abbess and Kendrick had taken up bows and were firing into the advancing crowd of barbarians. I hovered uselessly, worrying that the ghosts that had followed me from the catacombs might find it amusing to give me a little shove while I was standing in this precarious place. The smells of blood and pitch were making me woozy, and the smoke stung my eyes. "Princess Janine!" one of the guards called above the screams of men, some attacking, some dying. "Lady, this is a dangerous place for one not trained in warcraft. It's best for you to find a more secure position within." He was right. Even if my personality had provided me with the inclination to participate, Rasmussen had not provided me with the skill for fighting. But I couldn't believe my role in this battle was merely to seek a suitable hiding place, even though that was my inclination. I had to fight every instinct I had. "What can I do to help?" I shouted back. For one who has been so concerned about getting me to safety, he was quick enough to point to one of the pages who was dumping a basketful of arrows to replenish the stock the archers were using. "Show the princess where the supplies are kept," the guard ordered the page. And so I started running up and down the stairs, bringing load after load of arrows to the archers, delivering them to different stations on the wall to make sure nobody ran out. Apparently, the ghosts were diverted enough by all the activity that they didn't feel called upon to trip me or knock me down. Despite my ongoing terror, things went well until I dropped a basket of arrows between Abbess and Kendrick. The area was slick from water used to douse some burning debris, and as I turned, one of my feet slipped. No amount of frantic arm waving was enough to regain my balance. I could tell I was sliding toward the edge, like one of those out-of-control skaters. I had time to ask myself, can I possibly survive a fall from this height? And to answer myself, not likely. Before my right foot cleared the edge, and then my left. And then someone had a hold of me around my waist and hauled me back up onto the wall. That someone was Kendrick. I saw the surprise on his face as he took in my damp, sooty appearance and recognized me. And then he gave that grin that even under the best of circumstances made my knees weak. "Thank you," I managed to whisper. "You're welcome." Too bad he was my half-brother in this game. Too bad he wasn't real. Behind him, a barbarian who had shimmied up a rope anchored by a grappling hook cleared the top of the wall, and Abbess took his head off with a swipe of his sword. And then he sliced through the rope to prevent anyone else from climbing up. I looked down the dizzying height and saw a cluster of barbarians holding their shields above their heads of other men to protect them from the arrows our archers were raining down on them. "What are they doing?" I asked. "Something," Kendrick told me. My Rasmussen, provided subconscious, told me that meant they were digging a tunnel so that the section of the wall would collapse. "Are we in danger?" I asked. "Not imminent danger. It would be worse at night when we can't see them so well. Meanwhile..." He nodded beyond me, and I saw that Captain Penrod and some of his men had emerged by a nearby doorway, carrying a huge cauldron that I could only assume held something hot and nasty. The barbarians must have had a lookout for just such a thing, for as our men tipped the cauldron, a trumpet or horn sounded, and the barbarian sappers ran from their place by the wall, so that the burning oil spilled only on the slowest of them. Then suddenly their horns sounded again, and all the barbarians fell back. "What's that all about?" Kendrick asked suspiciously. "Don't know," Abbas answered. "No reason for a retreat." Back and back the barbarians pulled, until they were completely out of the range of our archers. Then one man, bearing a white flag, approached on horseback. "Surely they're not surrendering," I said, though I very much hoped they were. "Parley," Captain Penrod told me. "They want to talk, though I don't know why. They weren't winning, but neither were they losing." Watching with barely suppressed strain as the barbarian messenger approached, the castle guards waited, their arrows notched and trained on him. Finally, within shouting range, the barbarian reined his horse and called up to us. "Return what is being ours, or we will be killing all of you." Kendrick, Abbas, and Penrod, everyone was looking at me. Oh, my turn to do something. I stepped closer to the edge of the battlements, clutching the upright merlin to steady myself. I scanned the ground below, deserted now except for the bodies of the dead and wounded. If a ghost tickled or shoved me now, I was surely a goner. If one of those supposedly dead barbarians below was faking, I was an open target. Still, I raised my arms so the messenger could see me, and I shouted down to him, "That offer was made to you already. You returned our envoys without their heads. If you killed them before they spoke, this is what they were sent to say. We don't have the crown of Breck, but we are willing to help you find and reclaim it." The messenger said, "That is being good and well, but the firstest you must be turning over to us, the one which is being held responsible for the death of our good King Grimald. Otherwise, we will never ever be giving up until every one of you is being dead." Everyone was looking in our direction. I reassured Abbas, "Don't worry, I would never turn you over to them." Kendrick made a sound, which after a moment I realized was a stifled laugh. Abbas scratched his head, obviously confused by what I just said. "What?" I thought. Captain Penrod shuffled his feet and told me, "The ranking officer is responsible for the actions of all of his or her command." For a second, I thought he was taking responsibility, but he didn't outrank Abbas. Oh, I did. "Oh," I said, "I was responsible for Abbas, and Adriana, and Kendrick, and Wolfgar. That hardly seemed fair when they were all so intent on killing me." There was a whiz and a thunk, which I figured was that hypothetical decoy left on the field to pretend he was dead until he got a clear shot at me. But it wasn't. It was one of our men shooting down towards the barbarian. The arrow had struck about a hand span in front of the horse and stood quivering in the ground while the rider tried to control his mount, which was rearing in fright. Whew, luckily, it didn't hit him, I thought, for surely breaking a truce by murdering an unarmed messenger was not right. But before I could take responsibility for my men and yell, "Don't kill him!" another arrow flew past the battlements and struck the ground inches from the horse's leg. And then another, and another, and another, and not one hit the horse or man. Their feather shafts formed a line in the dirt between him and us. Despite the threat of death, my men were saying that they would not turn me over. Whew, which was a big relief to me. The horse was turning in tight circles, but at least he was no longer rearing. The envoy poof, spat on the ground and yelled, "Then be preparing to being dead." And he spurred his horse back in the direction of his own lines. "Johnny, Johnny, Johnny." My men began chanting, sounding for all the world like fans cheering their favorite baseball player. And for a delirious moment, I forgot this was all make-believe, and that my life was in danger, not from barbarians invaders, but from a computer overload. And for a moment, I knew what it was like to be popular. Then I remembered that this was merely one step towards surviving this game. Captain Penrod was saying, "The men are with you because of your courage." Courage? I had been scared stiff every moment I had been here. Penrod must have known what I was thinking. He said, "You stayed. You helped. You did what you could." "Well, so did all of you," I said. "The Queen didn't," Penrod pointed out. Abbess and Kendrick gave a sour look over that rebuff to the royal family name. But then the barbarian messenger had made it back to his own lines. The rest of the barbarians gave a great yell and shook their swords and spears and bows in our direction. I expected them to storm the castle, but they didn't. In fact, they seemed to be settling down where they were. "They'll wait till nightfall," Penrod said. "They'll be able to accomplish more under the cover of dark. Still, we need to keep alert in case of raiding parties." Could I be crowned as king tomorrow if we were still under siege? It didn't seem likely. I couldn't believe I was supposed to wait until we wore the barbarians down, or the barbarians wore us down. I would have asked Kendrick and Abbess their thoughts, but they had melted into the crowd, and there was no sign of them. Penrod was ordering his men. "We must tend to our injuries despite this respite. Sergeants, count up the casualties so that we can settle up a schedule for resting and watching." "I'll be back," I promised Penrod. I felt the presence of the catacomb ghost crowding me as I went down the narrow stairwell back into the great hall. Apparently, the other times they had stayed on the battlements watching the attack, but now that there was a law, they wanted to hang around me for some more. Oh boy. We climbed over the broken doors of the great hall and had another meeting. Aldemore had fallen asleep, and I had to be nudged awake. "I," Queen Adriana announced as she walked into the room, "was seeing about provisions for our men. There is no need to make unfounded speculations about my courage." Well, someone had run to Mama fast with the news of all that was said. And I didn't believe her excuse either. How long does it take to run down to the kitchen and tell the cooks we're under attack, so prepare portable food? But I didn't point that out. I just said, "Good, thank you. That's one less thing for me to have to worry about." One very small thing. We didn't wait for Sister Mary Ursula, whose size and age pretty generally made her last to arrive. Evidently, she would catch up. "Any thoughts?" I asked. "You could sacrifice yourself for the good of the many," Adriana suggested. Of all people, it was Sir Deming who came to my defense. "The way the barbarians would see it is if we were weak enough to offer up our king, we're weak enough to be conquered. They would not be satisfied with just her death." "It was only a suggestion," Adriana pouted. "How vulnerable are we?" I asked. Kendrick said, "We have enough food to last 2 weeks longer on half rations. The well is supplied by the groundwater springs, so no way they can be befouled out. So, an unlimited supply of water." Which would have been good news if I didn't have only until tomorrow to settle this. "The sappers?" I asked. Abbess answered this time. If the guards are alert, the sappers can be kept at bay. He cracked his knuckles, which, if it was meant to show how tough he was, didn't impress me. Any back way I should know about? I asked. Like secret passages to the castle? Deming rolled his eyes. What's the purpose of fortified walls and a drawbridge if you're going to have a little door marked secret entrance, attackers, please stay out? Is that a yes or a no? I pressed. No secret ways in, he said. Okay, so for the moment, we're in no immediate danger. Is there anything we can do besides having our archers pick them off one by one? You mean by magic? Aldemar asked, his eyes blank and discerning as ever. That would be a possibility, I said. What can you do? I can smell the ghosts you have brought with you, Aldemar said. I can use my scrying glass to find people or other living creatures. I can transform my shape, and I can reanimate the dead. Wait, reanimate the dead? Finally, this was something that sounded like good news. You mean you could bring back our men that were killed during that attack? Aldemar nodded, but Oriel said, But they will still be dead, and they will keep on decomposing, which personally I found disagreeable in someone I am trying to carry a conversation with. That did sound like a serious drawback. What do you do, Oriel? I asked. She smiled, showing off perfect teeth that I would bet never had an overbite or suffered from tartar buildup. My specialty is potions, she said. I have one that will give a man or woman great strength and stamina. If you'd like, I could mix up a batch for all the guards so that each man could fight as though they were two. Sort of like an abbess clone? I said, wondering if she had given some of her potion to my middle half-brother, or if he had come by his strength solely through diligent self-absorption. Oriel blinked and processed my statement and said, Like a miniature abbess, yes. Except, Zenas said, obviously delighted to be the bearer of that news, for that slight little complication. Oriel made a bad smell face. Of course, Zenas would find a flaw in anything. What complication? I asked. It only lasts for 1 hour, Ariel admitted. So you would have to calculate exactly when would be the best time to administer it to the men. And, Zenas prompted. Peeved, Oriel pointed out to him, Your hair is on upside down. Solemnly, she admitted to me, After it wears off, the person will be so weak he won't even be able to stand up. And that stage lasts for 2 hours. Not a good thing if the battle isn't quite over on schedule. Zenas was tugging his ear and frowning, so Aldemar had a chance to say, Hardly better than one of my dead people, eh? I asked. Zenas, what do you do? Now he was ticked off too. Apparently I sit here all afternoon with my ear upside down and nobody tells me. Can you fix it magically? I asked, trying to be helpful, as well as trying to get a feel of what he was capable of. You ignorant little nobody, you, he snapped. I make artifacts, like crowns, that get stolen away from perfectly nice barbarian kings by unscrupulous civilized kings and then stupidly given to nasty dragons. He jumped to his feet. So I, for one, have no need to worry about the barbarians tearing down your walls or starving you out. For they hold me in high esteem, and will let me pass without harm. Perhaps, I told him, but unfortunately we won't be able to lower the drawbridge to let you out. I don't need you. He glanced around the room to conclude all of us, or your drawbridge. He muttered something I couldn't make out, then walked through the wall with as much ease as someone walking from sunlight through shadow. Now you've done it, Aldermore said. Now you've really irked him. I guess so. Annoying as the beastly little guy could be, I asked, can you stop him? Because I might need him later on the game. I can only try. Aldermore reached into his robes and pulled out a vial form for which he poured a powder into his palm. Then he tossed it into the air in front of himself. As soon as the powder touched him, he transformed into a bat. Either that, or he disappeared and the powder itself transformed into a bat. It happened too fast to be sure of anything, except that it was one of the scenes from Rasmussen's promo, only then it had been an eagle. With a crying discerningly like a squeal, the bat flew out of the window. Queen Adriana said to me, well, you've gotten rid of 2 of the 3 people most likely to help us out of this disaster you caused. What are you going to do next? I caused this? What about Abbas's input into the situation? Luckily, I didn't have to answer, because at that moment, Sister Mary Ursula entered the room. Unluckily, what she said was, bad, bad, bad news, oh, bad news. Prince Wolfgar and the squadron accompanying him and the treasury are now all one with the barbarians. And that's the end of this chapter. So 3 sentences on this chapter, and then 3 sentences on the next.